Welcome to the second video for this week. This one on focusing your own research question. If the last step asked you to multiply questions and come up with many questions as a group, this step, of course, is to focus in on just one or at least a couple that you want to focus on in your research. Let me say right up front, those do not have to be the same as the other members of your group. You may go in very different directions at this point. At the same time, they might be the same. If you all decide to focus on precisely the same question, you will still write different papers, and that's okay with me. Let me just say a few words about why I want you to have lots of questions and one. Both are important, I think, to this process, and let me give you a context about why. I think many questions can give your research directions, meaning it can help you know what sources are relevant at all, because otherwise, you can find hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of articles that deal with your broad topic, but unless you know what directions you want to take that research, it's hard to know which sources are relevant or important to your research. When it comes to writing, having many questions gives your paper depth and development. At the same time, on the flip side, a single question gives your research focus, and that sort of ties into what I just said. It allows you to say these sources are really relevant to what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to answer in my paper. And then when it comes to writing, your single question can give your paper a much better sense of organization, because you know what your single thesis is focused on. Just to put it bluntly, a good research essay has to have depth and development and focus and organization. A lot of ideas without a clear focus is a recipe for disaster. I've had research papers in the past dealing with very broad topics that have tons of information and no particular question at the heart of them. And those are just very weak papers. But I've also had students who say, well, I've written 2.5 pages, I'm all done. I covered all of my research question. And the problem there is they don't have enough depth and development. They don't have enough questions to answer secondary questions, I guess. This is another way to put that. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, said the author of Alice in Wonderland. And the point being, or the joke being, that if you're not quite sure what you're looking for when you research, any source might look good, or perhaps no sources will look good. So it's really crucial to start the research process with a good sense of your direction and multiple directions you might take, but also that focusing question. Before you choose just one question for yourself, though, I want you to try one other thing this week. I want you to sort your group's questions. And if you're in a smaller group, there may only be 20 questions or 30, but I want you to look through the list and, in your opinion, pick the questions that are the most interesting, the most important, the most promising, and simply cut and paste them higher in the list. And if you want to move your own up the list, that's fine, but they'll probably be sorted simply by the order that they were put into the wiki. I want you to pick some that you find especially promising and move them up closer to the top of the list. So as a group, you'll sort of sift through your questions and pick the more important ones. A couple things to keep in mind as you do that. There may be many questions that are primarily factual, and those are questions that may be very important. You may need to answer a lot of factual questions as you research and as you write about your topic, but they aren't big enough to be the primary focus of your essay. At the same time, there are questions that are far too big, questions that are too theoretical, philosophical, technical, scientific, or just plain big to answer in a single research essay. And I'll say that I see students more often than not choose these kinds of questions because they seem worthy of a research essay, but often they're just too big to answer. You need to focus in on something pretty specific for this paper. And then finally, you should rule out questions that are too controversial or two-sided, questions that are clearly divided already into pro and con, two particular sides, Republican, Democrat, whatever, as well as loaded questions that have obviously one right answer in your view. And those aren't very helpful when it comes to writing a paper that should consider many points of view and that sort of thing. If I said, is it cruel to test beauty products on helpless animals, my answer is obvious, and that makes for sort of a one-sided research process and project. So avoid those as your central research question. Here's another way to put that. I'll skip over this sort of quickly, but just to give an example, iPads in elementary school, questions such as how many schools are using iPads? Is it a growing trend? How do they pay for the equipment? Do iPads increase student scores? Those are all questions that could be answered with statistics, with facts, etc. At the same time, questions such as does technology fundamentally change the nature of education is a great question, but far too philosophical and broad for this kind of paper. That might play into your paper a lot, but you need to find something in between those two, a focused, unresolved question that you might wrestle with that's more specific and more focused than this and less factual than these. So one of your assignments then is to go back to this long list and look for some possible contenders for a single research question. Now, it may not be there. You may need to rewrite some of those or come up with a new one. But what you're looking for is a single question. It will change over time, probably, but a working question that will focus your research. A couple more comments real quick. One danger at this point that I've seen a lot of students fall into is to choose something that's too broad. I just mentioned this a minute ago. Let me give two examples, or a few examples. These two options. Childhood obesity is a nationwide concern. What should we do about it? Is big. The second one is actually one that a student last year wrote. Childhood obesity is a nationwide concern. To what level should people other than parents be allowed to intervene? And I thought as a working question, that was a great one because it's more specific and focused in its interest than just sort of solutions to childhood obesity, which is far too broad and far too sort of informational probably. A student last year actually did ask this early on as a possible research question, and I almost laughed out loud. This is far too philosophical and broad and huge for this paper. Someone else asked this one, and a few people are doing a related topic this year. Should pit bulls be banned? That's not a perfect research question at this point, but is much more focused and specific and opens up lots of questions about social policy and public laws and that sort of thing. These two, how should we educate kids in America? What's the solution to the problems in education? That's one that I made up. That's far too broad, impossible to cover in a research paper like this, even though it's a great question. This is one that a former student came up with last year, a mother of a few kids herself. The state of Michigan is mandating all-day, everyday kindergarten in order for public schools to receive state funding. Do the long and short-term effects warrant this decision? And I thought that's a great way to focus in on a much bigger philosophical issue, to focus your research and then to focus your writing of the paper. So this week, a couple things. Do this first step where you go back to the wiki and move some questions up that list, and then start highlighting questions that you find particularly interesting or promising, and then change the text color and put your initials behind those questions. And I'm going to try to show you right now what I mean by that. If you go to the wiki, open up the wiki page, edit the wiki content, all you need to do then is scroll through and let's say this one, would it be practical for students to do internships while still in high school? Or perhaps this one, what would students gain from internships? Go right here and change the color, and then behind it put your initials. And if you want to put, if someone else comes in and says I like that question as well and wants to put their initials, that's fine too. But the idea here is to pick several questions, and maybe they'll be the ones that you move up to the top of the list, that you particularly find interesting and promising for your own work. All right, I'll put some of these directions on Blackboard as well. That's it for this video. Email me if you have any questions.